Terry. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much, Terry. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Terry, and thank you, all of you, for being here today. It really is great to see this. It's very, very special. It's the start, I think, of something that we will become used to here in Ballina, that we have events like this, meetings like this. I had intended to greet some of the dignitaries and distinguished guests who are here, but Terry's done such a good job. I will borrow the South African expression, all protocols observed, which is very well. But I would like to specially thank the honour guard that stood outside in the cold to welcome us, the honour guard of Scouts and Girl Guides. That was really special. And I'd also like to thank the wonderful gospel choir who sang as we came in and who sang afterwards, and who will sing again. And finally, I would like to warmly thank some very hard-working people who helped to put this whole event together and who were making sure that all the details of today worked. And that's why it has worked. We couldn't control the weather, but even it is better here than it was when we were coming down from Dublin. We saw the sun. Graça stood out in the sunshine and smiled with pleasure to see it. And I'm very proud of my hometown of Ballina, of my county of Mayo, of the West of Ireland. I've always felt very rooted in the West of Ireland, and I think this occasion speaks to the fact that we can organise incredibly important events here. And just after lunch, we did meet with the women who took part in the leadership programme in the Newman Institute, and we met some migrant women who have come to Mayo. And that was very special because that is really what it's about. It's about making sure that we build a great capacity for leadership, a great capacity for personal leadership, and that we try to build through speakers who will come, through courses, through workshops, a centre of learning and of excellence. It's great that we have this link with Galway University. I have a link with the two centres in Galway, which are supporting us very strongly, and Jim Brown, the president of Galway's University, is on the board of the Mary Robinson Centre. The first centre that I was involved in was the Centre for Human Rights in Galway, and it really is a first-class centre for human rights, world recognised. One of the early centres, established primarily by a very good friend of mine, sadly deceased, Kevin Boyle. Kevin gives me a certain amount of credit because apparently I kind of helped him to persuade Galway University that there needed to be a centre for human rights. That's much less controversial than my relationship with the Women's Centre, the Centre for Women's Leadership in Galway, because that was a little bit more problematic. Just after I was elected president, a few months later, we got a letter from some academics in Galway. And the letter said, would the President of Ireland come and open our Women's Centre? Now, I was very open to this because I had been involved in a women's centre in my own university, Trinity College. I had also helped, during the presidential campaign, to launch the Women's Centre in University College Dublin, because that was a great way to meet people who might vote for me and, you know, be around. And then, so I was very open to the idea, and my special advisor, Bride Rosny, said, well, you couldn't go especially, but actually you're due to be in Galway in about 2 months' time. Will we tie it in? And I said, absolutely, say yes, tie it in. And the women academics went to the president of Galway University and said, the President of Ireland is coming to open our centre. Can we have a centre, please? That's the way to do it. That's the way to do it. Terry did mention, and I was going to mention also, that the 3rd of December is the 25th anniversary of my inauguration as President of Ireland, together with Nick and family members who were present. It was an unforgettable day. It's imprinted on my memory very, very vividly. I remember every second of the day. And I would not have thought that 25 years later, I would be standing before this large crowd here in Ballina to continue a kind of interest in and involvement in human rights, gender equality, women's leadership, climate justice. And I'm just going to say a few words about the climate justice, because I think some people sort of say, what exactly does that mean? And I'm so passionate about it now that I just thought I might say a few words, and then of course I'll hand over to our main speaker, who will be introduced by Olivia O'Leary. I'm quite humble about my interest in and involvement in climate justice, because when I was serving for 5 years in Geneva as UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, I never mentioned climate. I didn't see any connection with human rights. Climate was dealt with by another part of the UN, and we were in our silos. I was dealing with human rights. The UNFCCC, as it's called, was dealing with climate. When I finished my 5 years, I wanted to put more focus on rights that matter greatly to developing countries, and particularly to Africa, as I knew. And these were the important economic and social rights, rights to food and safe water, and health and safety. Sometimes in the richer parts of the world, we take these for granted, but if you don't have them, they are the vital rights, the absolutely vital rights. And there weren't enough NGOs and groups championing these rights. They weren't being talked about enough. So I formed a small NGO. We were based in New York with colleagues in Washington and Geneva, but actually our focus was on African countries. And we decided that we would work on the right to health, we would work on women, peace and security, we'd work on the right to food. I was also honorary president of Oxfam. So through Oxfam, I was invited to a lot of other events. And it meant that in a peculiar way, I was visiting a lot of African countries to speak about these things and to listen to the voices of people on the ground and to learn the realities of people's lives. And I kept hearing this sentence, and it went more or less, oh, but things are so much worse. And the so much worse was not conflict. It was the climate change. It was the weather change. I talked to Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, the president of Liberia, whom I knew as a friend. I would have breakfast with her when I went to Liberia. And she would say to me, Mary, when I was growing up, when I was a child here in Liberia, we had 2 rainy seasons, and they came predictably within a week. They were never late, and they stopped when they should. Now, she said, I have no idea if the rainy season will come, when it will come, how long it will last. I can't mend my roads, and of course, there are huge problems for agriculture. Another friend of mine, Catherine O'Kellett, from northern Uganda, spoke about the fact that when she was growing up in her village, they had plenty to eat. They were poor, but they had food because they knew when to sow and when to harvest. But about the year 2000, things started to change, much for the worse. And they had long periods of drought and then flash flooding. And the flash flooding destroyed the school. So she formed a women's group, and then Oxfam found her, if you like. She's called one of the climate-wise women. And Constance is her first name. I said Catherine, it's Constance. And Constance would speak very vividly about how this was making a huge impact on her community and that it was getting worse. And these were the stories that I was hearing all over Africa. And I realized that actually climate change is a huge human rights issue because it's undermining rights to food and safe water and health. Health because in many ways indoor pollution from using open fires for cooking, using wood and charcoal and animal dung means, according to the Lancet, that there were 4 million deaths a year for the last few years from indoor pollution. It also means the trees are being cut down for charcoal or for wood. And so, in a way, I see climate change in a much more positive light. I see the way in which we can move to a zero-carbon world. We can have energy for everyone who was left out of the Industrial Revolution, and there were a lot of people left out. There are 1.6 million people in our world today who don't have access to electricity, who never switch a switch. They light their homes with kerosene and candles, and they pay quite a lot of money out of their budget for it. 2.6 billion out of the 7.2 billion in our world cook on open fires and ingest this smoke. They have been left out of the Industrial Revolution, but there's no reason why they would be left out now of the changes that we need to make to move to renewable energy for our world, to get rid of these greenhouse gas emissions. Because we actually have two things that are very important, and I'll end with this. We have the gadgets. We have increasingly the possibility of solar cookers, of efficient cookers, of lights, of fridges that are solar, all the ways of changing lives. And we have the technology of the payment, because people can only pay in tiny amounts, but we have the mobile phone. And most people, even if they don't have light in their home, have a mobile phone now, and they can pay in tiny amounts. So there's no reason why we can't reach those 1.3 billion who don't have access to electricity, the 2.6 billion, and there's some overlap, who still cook on open fires. We can reach them. This is a challenge for young people. This is the challenge of climate, that we change our world to a renewable world, and it will be a much better world. And in Paris, in the next few days, we need the decisions that will set us on a pathway. Paris won't get us there, but it will set us on a pathway to a safe world. And why is that important? And this is my final point. It is important because every child born today will live through, if they live, will live through what we will leave them in terms of decisions about climate. And either they will thank us for taking the necessary steps, or they will say, how could they have been so selfish, so unthinking? Did they not know? Did they not realize? And that's every child today. And I think that's the most important lesson. We don't have time to forget this or think that it's too difficult. It's not. And it is actually in places like this that we can make the changes, that we can do the recycling, that we can change our habits a little bit, and in fact encourage our governments to move more to renewable energy. I could go on for hours because you're such a listening audience, but I'm taking up the time of our special guest who's come all the way. My sister Graça, my beloved friend, will be introduced by Olivia, and she will speak on women's leadership. Thank you. Thank you.
Terry Riley spoke a moment ago about our very own Mary Robinson. Well, listen, I come from the East Coast, and she's our very own Mary Robinson as well. You can't totally possess her. The other thing I wanted to say was it's absolutely wonderful to be here on the west coast of Ireland and to look around at what is an international audience, to see faces here from all over the world, and even a costume or two that I've seen from all over the world. As a political observer and commentator, I sometimes get terribly tired of the parochial nature of our political debate. You know, it can come down sometimes to the fourth preference vote in South Kerry or whatever it is. And sometimes it's an enormous relief to be talking on what is now an international stage here this afternoon about global issues. I'm introducing Graça Machel, and she has done so much in her life. She's been given so many awards, including the honorary doctorate, which was conferred on her in Trinity College yesterday. She's held so many positions, it's hard to know where to start. But a very simple summary would say that for 4 decades, she's been a passionate and an untiring advocate for human rights all over the world, particularly in Africa, particularly for women and children. She was the new state of Mozambique's first Minister for Education back in the 70s. She has produced a groundbreaking United Nations report on the impact of armed conflict on children. More recently, she's worked on reports on rape and gender-based violence against women. She is at the moment, she's so many things. I could be standing here all day telling you about what she does, but I'm just going to choose 3. She is currently the chair of the Partnership for Maternal, Newborn and Child Health. She's the Chancellor of the University of Cape Town, and I had a wonderful discussion with her over lunch about university issues, and they reflected indeed so many of our own. She's also the head of the Graça Machel Trust, and I think that may well take up most of her time. What she does and what the Trust does is it establishes networks, particularly economic networks for women, all over Africa, helping them to take power, more power over their own lives. Along the way in her life, she was married to two presidents. First, Graça Machel of Mozambique, who was killed in a plane crash in the 80s, and more recently to the late Nelson Mandela, President of South Africa. She is now a member of the Elders, the group of wise older stateswomen and men which Mandela helped to found, as of course is our former President Mary Robinson. They're friends and they're colleagues, but they have chosen to be here this afternoon in Ballina for this great occasion. So now, to deliver the second Mary Robinson Centre International Human Rights Lecture, would you please welcome Graça Machel.
Thank you, Olivia. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Please be seated. Please be seated. Please sit. My dear sister Mary, thank you so much for bringing me here to Ballina. I'm full of emotion, and I think I will never be able to express my gratitude to all of you for receiving us so warmly, and particularly the children and young people who were the guard of honor. And I was so humbled, and I was saying to them, please go inside, it's so cold. I want to recognize all the board members of the Mary Robinson Center, all the dignitaries of this city and of the country. And as Mary said, I will simply say really all protocol observed. I would like to recognize the migrants who are here. I have been a refugee myself when I was much younger. In Tanzania, I left my country of birth to fight for the liberation of Mozambique. And we were so warmly received and treated in Tanzania that we established a relationship of brotherhood and sisterhood where we feel Tanzania today is still our second land. I hope you all who are here in this country, you will also feel the warmth and the love of the Irish people, and you will have this as your second home. I have been asked to talk about women in leadership. And I will begin by paying tribute to some of those I believe being iconic women for human rights. Eleanor Roosevelt, she, as the chair of the United Nations Human Rights Commission, she was a driving force in creating the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And she is a woman. Rosa Parks, who refused to surrender her bus seat to a white passenger. She enacted actually the Montgomery boycott and other efforts to end racial segregation in the United States. She is considered the first lady of civil rights and the mother of the freedom movement. Our own Mary Robinson, she just told us how much she has done for this country, establishing centers for human rights, even before she became a head of state. But Mary Robinson left a mark in the history of human rights when she became the commissioner. The way she led that commission made of human rights a very integral part of the movement for dignity for all, which had never been seen before. And she remains until today the High Commissioner for Human Rights. Wangari Maathai from Kenya. She was an environmental and political activist, and she received the Nobel Peace Prize laureate in 2004. It was the first time that environment action was recognized as a fundamental element of peace in the world. She led the Green Belt movement to focus on poverty reduction and environmental conservation through very simple methods, just planting trees, which became millions and millions, but they balanced what Mayo was talking about, the rains, and to sustain life for millions and millions of families. Aung San Suu Kyi, she led the National League for Democracy, now to the majority win in Myanmar, first openly contest elections in 25 years. And Mary was there to observe elections. She is actually the lady, as she is known, and she won the Nobel Peace Prize. But she's a symbol of determination, of consistency in her principles that you will find very few political leaders in the world. And she is, in that part of the world and everywhere, really the lady of human rights. Rigoberta Menchú from Guatemala. She's an activist for native rights and winner of 1992 Nobel Peace Prize. She gave a face and voice to minority groups, and particularly to Indian rights and ethno-cultural reconciliation globally. Gro Brundtland. Today, Mary is telling us about the conference in Paris, which is to start to take place. But it was the Brundtland Commission which, for the first time, raised the issue of the importance of the environment. Had we listened to her and to recommendations her commission made at that time, we probably wouldn't be where we are today, where we feel we are at the precipice of a disaster. And as Mary also has said, it is a bit late, but it's still time. We have no time to wait until we take these very bold steps which are required to reverse the impact of climate change. Now, it sounds like it is a coincidence, but for me it is not. It was Gro Brundtland, Wangari Maathai, and today it's Mary Robinson, who is the special envoy of the Secretary General for Climate Change. And it is Christiana Aguirre, who is actually the Secretary General, who is organizing this whole building of consensus around the conference in Paris. And they are all women. And they are not there standing for women, they are standing for human race. And they have shaped our understanding as a global family on what it is to care for people, to care for the planet, and to care for the sustainability and the legacy we have to leave for generations to come. So with your permission, I would like to suggest that all of us will give a huge applause to those I call iconic women and my leaders. Now, the women's movement is still to be told and to be written. We do not have a systemic recording of how it has evolved. So what I'm going to say today is simply part of my personal reflection, but with the very clear conscience that it's very limited. But I would say, just to remind some of us, that there were times where, when you talk of leadership, you would be simply seeing gray suits and ties, and you wouldn't see a face of a woman. What has happened in recent times is that, yes, in presence, the landscape of global leadership has changed. There is a presence of women. And I will say this means that women have visibility in leadership in different layers of human activities. So we moved from obscurity to visibility. And I would like us to record, yes, visibility. Then we moved from visibility to influence. And the examples which I have just mentioned as iconic women is very clear that they have influenced the shaping of global policy. They have influenced the shaping of our understanding of what life is. They have shaped values which underlies anyone who lives an ethic way of looking at himself or herself and to the other. But I have to remind us that as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was adopted in 1948, it's only 30 years later, in 1975, that the human family woke up and remembered, oh, by the way, it looks like we have forgotten women. And the first conference to focus on women, it happened in 1975. It was almost, 30 years after. Then, and it was called for the first time, equality of women and their contribution to development and peace. The second was in Copenhagen. And that's when we agreed on the Convention on the Elimination of all forms of discrimination against women. And that remains a milestone of the Copenhagen Conference. And it acknowledged also the gap between rights being secured for women and women's ability to exercise those rights. The third conference was in Nairobi in 1985, and set out areas by which progress in women's equality could be measured. Constitutional and legal measures, equality in social participation, equality in political participation and decision-making. I'm mentioning this because, as you can follow, it is as if women's rights had to take a slow and progressive, gradual recognition, as if women's rights were not equally human rights since 1948. And that's the point I want to make. In 1994, we had the International Conference on Population and Development in Cairo, which for the first time brought the issue of recognizing reproductive health and rights for women as the first time where it is acknowledged that women have the rights to control their bodies. Women have the right to decide how many children they can have if they want to have children. And this is something which comes as if it was not inherent to their rights as human beings. But I want to emphasize the fact that it takes a painful pace of one by one in decades to recognize that this human being who is a woman is a complete human being with rights as really it should be. Then we had the Fourth World Conference on Women. That's when we realized also that despite all agreements, but action for equality and development and peace. Why? Because it was acknowledged there was no action enough. The Beijing conference, it for the first time had to make it loud and clear that women's rights are human rights. So please bear with me that we are coming from a declaration which was adopted in 1948 and only in 1995 the world says women's rights are human rights. There were a series of actions which we have to acknowledge that ever since the Beijing conference, women's rights did gain an impetus, and actions in a diversity of areas were adopted, and since then there hasn't been any other big reflection on women's rights, except that we do have, every 5 years, 10 years, we have a balance of measuring process made. But it sounds like we made peace with the fact that women's rights are human rights in Beijing, and now we simply have to measure progress. More importantly, more governments, I must say even all governments, today they feel ashamed not to have in the constitution and in the laws and even in plans, women's rights, and something which is aimed at implementation of women's rights. But we are here, almost 70 years later. Women's rights are still not fully recognized, respected, and implemented. We do have, we do have visibility, we do have influence, but women do not hold power yet. Power. And I want the relationship of being visible, of being influential, but of being able to exercise power where decisions are made and where decisions are to be taken seriously. That's where we need to be. And where we are, I'm going to suggest, sometimes where we are, we have not been able to transform structures. Structures are still very much resistant to accept the centrality of human dignity for all having to be a DNA of whatever we do as a human family and to respect women's rights. Because of that, I will insist on the issue of, yes, visibility, yes, influence, but now power, exercise power in equal position and with equal capacity to insert and assert action, which is not to benefit women alone, it's to benefit men and women, young and old, wherever they are, is to benefit human family and human dignity. Now let me come to give some examples of my own continent, Africa. Well, Africa is in numbers actually doing much better than other regions of the globe. Today we have our first female head of state, Ellen Johnson, who Mary just mentioned as one of her sisters. She is the president of Liberia. She was the first actually elected female president in our continent. After a huge, disruption of life through a brutal conflict, she was able to come and reconcile her country. And yes, Liberia is not a developed country today, but it's much, much reconciled with itself because of her leadership. Even when the Ebola crisis erupted, Liberia was the first country to declare free of Ebola. It takes a woman's leadership to reconcile, one, to face a challenge which was of such magnitude, but it was the first country. Guinea has not managed yet. Sierra Leone has not managed yet, but Liberia, yes, it is a good example of how to confront challenges. We have a president from the Central African Republic, Catherine Samba-Panza, and she made it a point that in her government at least a third would be women. Central Africa is still facing huge, huge challenges, but she's a woman of determination. It's a very good example for us on the continent. We have another woman, Amina Gurib Fakim. She was recently elected in Mauritius, and she comes from the area of science. She's a scientist, but she received an overwhelming approval from both government and opposition political parties in the parliament of Mauritius. We have some of our own young women who are coming, like the Prime Minister of Namibia, who is actually a child of the struggle. She was a brilliant Minister of Finance, and now she is the Prime Minister in Namibia, and we are looking forward to the time where she's going also to grasp the presidency. Why do I mention this? It's because an African child today can dream. An African girl child can dream of being president because it has happened before. Before we had those, I'll tell you a story. Madiba used to talk to children and ask them, oh, how old are you? And then what would you like to be when you grow up? And we were having some family friends, and there's a child who is the grandchild actually of Edouard Mondlane, the first president of Frelimo, a girl, and he asked her, what would you like to be when you grow up? And she said, I don't know. And he said, wouldn't you like to be a president? And she says, how can I be a president? I'm a woman. That was like 10 years back. An African child wouldn't dream of had never seen a woman being a president, and because of that she would say, how can I be a president? I'm a woman. Now, that has been removed from her dreams, and landscape. It is important. It's not enough, but it's important because it shows it is possible, and actually they are being successful heads of states. We have a significant representation of women in our parliament, and I think this is very important to share with you. For instance, we do have Rwanda as the first country in the world in terms of representation of women. It has 63% of parliamentarians are women in Rwanda. We have 5 countries which have over 40% of representatives in parliament. 11 countries which have over 30%, and 8 which have over 20%. This is a progress which was achieved in the last, let me say, 50 years of development of our continent in terms of freedom. And 50 years, you will say, yes, it's long time. It's long time for a human being. But 50 years in history, it's actually a very short period of time. What says is that transformation is taking place. And there is an acceptance that the presence and the influence, and hopefully soon we'll have power of women, has to be at the mainstream. We also have African women who are in the global arena. Well, let's start by regional. Our first president of Pan-African Parliament is Gertrude Mongela. She's a woman. For the first time when we had a Pan-African Parliament, a woman was elected. Today we have Nkosazana Zuma, who is the chair of the African Union Commission, and it makes a difference to have a woman chairing the African Union. Because for the first time, there is a long-term thinking about where we want to be. That's why she shaped a movement which produced the Africa Agenda 2063, which means 50 years from now. She implements programs which are directly affecting women's lives. As we speak, this year is the year of women's empowerment, and just in a few days, Lusaka is going to host a summit which is going simply to discuss girl-child, and particularly the elimination of child marriages. It takes a leadership of a woman to understand that you can't talk of African development if you don't. Women who are adults, but beginning even by the girl child herself. Well, we have our sister, Phumzile Mlambo Ngcuka, who is the United Nations Under-Secretary and Executive Director of UN Women. And yeah, but I have to be honest. The presence, maybe I should speak of Amina as well. Amina Mohammed coordinated the movement which shaped the Sustainable Development Goals, which we simply, adopted recently in September. So these African women with the huge capacity for them to occupy these positions. But let's be honest. The structures of African Union are changing because Nkosazana Zuma is there. We adopted the Sustainable Development Goals. It is a bold agenda, and which is to lay the foundations for sustainable development for all of us. Does it mean that we made it all in terms of bringing women to the center of this agenda? The UN Women is not the poorest, maybe the second poor, of all the agencies of the United Nations. What I'm trying to say is, as much as I recognize the developments we have, we still have to acknowledge that there's much more to take into account. Why the UN Women is so funded, we're understaffed. It is actually, it's as if we want to say, yeah, we have an agency for women, and let women deal with their own issues while other agencies will be dealing. I think we still have to take these issues much more seriously. But I want to bring then, I was talking about the top. I want to bring what I believe for me is the most empowering story which is coming out of Africa. It is those women in the middle who have no much of visibility yet, but really they are shaping what is the transformation of our continent. Some of the women are in the mining industry, like Daphne Mashilinkosi. She's one of the shareholders, and she leads one of the biggest mining companies in South Africa. As she employs now about 30,000 people. She is really making waves in the mining industry. As you know, South Africa is a very, very developed, country in terms of industry, and we have never had, that kind of strength in the hands of a woman. We have good examples of young women like Rapelang Rabana. She is also a young South African. At the age of 23, she co-founded a communications company, which became one of the first companies in the world to offer voice over internet protocol services for mobile phones. 23 years old. Juliana Rotich is a co-founder of software platform called ushahidi.com, where citizens could report incidents of violence, and this came exactly around elections violence in Kenya. And she invented this kind of software, which helped, to monitor violence and to report, and of course it resulted in protection of human rights. And these are some examples of what we can show, that there are these young women who are emerging, who do not yet have the visibility, but it's in the area of business, it's in the area of science, it's in the area of telecommunications. I want to come to one of my very, very interesting stories. I helped, and I'm leading a group of network of women in finance. We have 15 chapters, national chapters as we call it. And one of the chapters which I'm very proud of is the Ugandan one. A young lady called Teopitsa Ntale, she started a movement which, just to be short because I have run out of my time, in 1 year, in one district, organizing business, a bank owned by young women as well. She went village by village, organized committing, these little groups of 5, of 10, etc. In 1 year, she was able to enroll 250,000 villages to be, for the first time, to open a bank account, to begin to manage their loans, and also to have savings. Now they are in the second district, because this was in one district alone. Now they are in the second district. And of course, all the political leadership in Uganda is very, very enthusiastic, and now they are supported. But it takes a woman who, before we started working with them, no one realized that Teopitsa had this kind of potential. Another example is the deputy governor of Central Bank in Rwanda. I went there to open their chapter, and they organized themselves. They said, Mama, we don't want to come to you all the time and say, where are you going to get finances for us? We are going to establish a fund. And she mobilized from women professionals, women villagers, women in business. And she said, we established already a fund, and in a period between 3 to 5 years, we will enroll at least 1 million women into the financial system, people who have no bank account so far. These are the kind of transformations which, when you talk of Africa, many of you here, you hear about those who are dying of AIDS, those who are dying at birth, those who are refugees, etc., etc. That face of a narrative which is being developed at the grassroots, at the middle, as I said, at the top, that's the narrative which is being developed by African women, which never reach you. You know, we can give more and more examples of, for instance, one of the successes which we have is that in our universities today, most of the tertiary students are girls, and they are coming in numbers. It's like what you could find, for instance, in natural science. In countries like Algeria, 43% of them are girls. In Tunisia, 41. I don't know for any reason, but Northern Africa is doing much better. 35 in Angola, and again, North Africa, it's 32 in Morocco. In medical science, you find over 51%. Some of the countries like Cape Verde, 50%, Gabon, 58, Mozambique, 53, Tunisia, 52, Angola, 51. Girls are entering into the scientific world very strongly, and they are grasping opportunities there. In agriculture, for instance, some of the countries have 40% of the students in agriculture are girls. Why this is important is because the areas of science are those who are extremely important to change the landscape of the African continent, particularly if it's women who can grasp it. I'd like also to mention before I finish, for instance, in culture and in the media. There's a young lady from Nigeria called Mo Abudu. She is now referred like Africa's Oprah Winfrey. She is really, listen to this, she says, everything you think you know about Africa is about to change forever. What she does is to profile women, young people, business people, who bring precisely this narrative of transformation which is coming from the continent. And it is to counter precisely the idea of we as Africans as the needy, etc., etc. No, we are still, challenged, but Africa is changing. I'd like to mention, for instance, writers, young writers who call themselves storytellers, like Buchi, Echementa, and Idus, who are women who defy the stereotypes of women's roles in our time. And they talk of women's struggles against sexual discrimination, racism, classism, sexism, and have questioned the rigidity of gender structures. And I'm sure you have heard of Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, who has been also very much hailed. What does it mean? Is whether it's in media and culture, whether it is in science, whether it is in medical science, of course it's science, but whether it's in political, there is a transformation which is happening, and it is coming in the shoulders of giants, of the iconic women I talked about. I want to end mentioning one of the young ladies who was with me when we did the study on the impact of armed conflict on children, Thea Soa. She is now chairing an African Development Fund, which is present in 43 countries, and they are able to give grants of thousands to small organizations with a lot of diversity, from human rights to economic empowerment to communication, you name it. What is important of this is for you to be a grant maker in 43 countries in Africa, with the context and difficulties of communication we are, it requires a huge capacity of organization to monitor and to be able to see the results which are coming there. This is to say, yes, we are in times of writing a new narrative. But I want to come to global. When I say we still have to grasp power, I want to use two examples. I do not know of any country, maybe you are a good example, any country which have crossed the bridge of equal work, equal pay. Do you know of? No. 70 years after the recognition of human rights, there's no legal justification for women not to be paid the same salary. There is no any constitutional constraint for this not to be done. Actually, laws, they say we are all equal. But in the minds of people, in the minds of those who hold power, they find it in their right to discriminate against a woman who is educated, who has expertise, who has experience, who actually in many cases exercise position of leadership. But she's paid less simply because she's a woman. And this is a global challenge. It's not of developing countries or developed, it's a global challenge. Another example, gender-based violence. There's no one country which can say it's free from gender-based violence. Why? Because some people believe that they own women and they can do whatever they want with them. When they are challenged, maybe in their insecurity or whatever other reasons, women are beaten up. Women are killed. In some countries, there are statistics which are horrifying of women dying in the hands of their partners because the changing of mentality, of recognizing the dignity, the value, the respect, the equality of a woman to be equal to man is still very far. And particularly in this, because it's in privacy of life. And it is actually between people who have said, I love you, once. They say, I love you. And I love you, it means you are part of me and I'm prepared to protect you. And it's precisely in the hands of someone who once has said, I love you, women are being killed. Why I end with this is to say, we as a human family, we have come a long way. We have a lot to celebrate. But it is in these two examples, the last ones, where you know she is qualified, she has expertise, she's doing exactly the same thing which a man is doing, but you pay less because she's a woman. And second, it is last case I'm talking about gender-based violence. We need to check ourselves and say in the next years to come, we need to cross that bridge of recognizing it's not only in issues of human rights, it's essentially in issues of human dignity. I am, in my language, we say, I am because you are, and you are because I am. That's the bridge we have to cross if we are to achieve equality for all women. And our children, my granddaughter, who is sitting in front of me, she is to grow in a society where she doesn't feel threatened simply because she's a girl. And she has to grow in a society where she knows when her mind is as bright and as capable, no one is going to stamp in her rights simply because she is a woman. Thank you so much.
Well done.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, please be seated. Thank you, thank you.
Graça, if I can start with you and some of the issues that you raised. I was just thinking, you know, we had a recent occasion in this country where the Abbey Theatre, which is our national theatre, announced 10 plays to celebrate the anniversary of 1916, the Great Irish Rebellion, which comes next year. And among, I think it was 10 plays, only one was written by a woman. And it seems extraordinary in this day and age that that would have happened. But immediately there was a reaction across social media under a hashtag Waking Feminism. And there was this enormous anger which was expressed by Irish women of all sorts, but particularly in the creative areas, and a big public meeting was held. And eventually the artistic director of the National Theatre had to come and say, fair cop, hands up, I got it wrong. I did not check my privilege, he said. And just listening to you there and knowing that you started off fighting with the freedom movement, is it important that women remember that they have to be fighters too, that they constantly have to raise a hand and say, sorry, this isn't good enough, that if we don't do it, nobody else is going to do it, because the best of men will have an unconscious, perhaps an unconscious sense of privilege if we don't constantly challenge that.
Mm-hmm. You are absolutely right, Olivia. It is so entrenched in the minds and the behavior within our society to, yes, I mean, women as well, but as I was saying, not as a fundamental right, which you should never, underestimate or undermine. Let me try to give an example. In our families, in our normal families, it has come to our instinctive behavior that the best you can give to somebody is to your child. You don't need to be reminded anymore. Am I correct? That's precisely where we have to get also when it comes to women. It should never cross the mind of anyone that when it comes to women, they can come second, they can come third, they can even be forgotten. And I think I will bring now here something which I didn't refer in my conversation. It is the responsibility of families in socialization, how we socialized our little ones. Because part of it, actually, it is women's making. Part of it. I'm saying part of it. Because we need to question whether we educate our little ones, our young ones, to really accept the equality of saying this society is made up of both of us as sex. And the fact that one has born a woman and another one was born a man, it's like someone is a doctor and another one is an engineer. You are not going to ignore that you need doctors and the doctors have a role. It is instinctive, you know, you go to a doctor. It is instinctive that if you want to build a house, you have to get an architect and you have to build it with an engineer. It's normal, but it has been embedded in our socialization to, I'm saying this, to accept that women are a sort of second category. And that's the bridge which we have to cross, in my view. So it happens lots of times, as we are saying. So we as women, some people are a little bit uncomfortable. They say, but why are you asserting women and you are not talking of boys as well? The problem is that so far, those who are being undermined are women. So we need to shout and shout and shout again until it comes to that understanding. And we as women also, to grasp every opportunity you have, especially the younger ones. Don't leave it to anyone else. You have an opportunity, grasp it. And you remember always, it's my right. It's not because I'm being made, it's not a favor, it is my right. So there's a long way to go in my view, yeah.
And and I know this is a campaign that the elders have taken on, when you've taken on the Girls Not Brides campaign, the thing that would immediately strike me is how can parents allow their girls to get married at such a young age when their lives are closed in, foreshortened, limited? How do you get through to parents on that issue, and how successful has that campaign been?
Let me maybe bring an experience of Mara. Mara is a province of Tanzania, up north, where our trust is working with quite a broad number of stakeholders to fight precisely child marriage. We recognize that the decision to give away a girl to be married is made by parents. It's not made in a community hall. It is a family decision. So we are targeting precisely the work with families, equally with the community leaders, with religious leaders, with business people, with the government officials, but we bring parents to be part of this debate and to challenge the thinking which they say, oh, they do this because of poverty. This is the argument many times is, oh, because the families are very poor. I said, no. It can't be the argument. If a family has 5 children, of these 5 children, 3 are girls and 2 are boys. Why they are not giving away a boy because they are poor? They give away a girl. That's exactly the same thing of thinking that this child, because is a girl, she's dispensable. She can be given away as if it's a commodity in which I take money or I take cattle in exchange. It is fundamental, the issue of how do I value a girl the same way I value a boy. It's the same way which takes people to think that because she's a girl, she cannot inherit my property. Only the boy can. So it's a very fundamental issue. But your question is, how do you get them? The only thing is, one, you need to engage them in this discussion, in which it's not only family by family, but you bring them into a broader context in which we would call it alliance. We build alliances. The second one, it is true that some families are extremely poor. So when the moment of truth comes in terms of paying fees, and I'm not saying of deciding marriage, or paying fees. They may not be able to pay fees. And because of that, we support families then to develop income so that they will not have the excuse that I'm taking the girl out of school because I can't pay fees. So you help them to develop the economic capacity to keep their children. But it is a changing of mentality which has to be the major issue. That's why we say, as elders, that this is going to take a generation. We are much more cautious. The SDGs, they say it will be in 15 years. But we as elders, because we are really old, and we think, this is going to take at least a generation, and we work in different levels. It is the leadership at the top, it's leadership in the middle, it's community leaders, and it's families themselves, particularly in socialization of girls and boys. That's why we say it takes a generation. When they turn 30, children of the day, if they have been properly socialized, when they turn 30, they make a decision about their life and their families, they will have a different mentality.
Yeah. Well, there was a wonderful story after Mary Robinson had been president and then was followed for 2 terms by Mary McAleese of a little boy saying to his mum one day, "Mum, can boys become president?"
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Yeah. I love that. I love that. I love that.
Yeah?
Can I just add to what Graça was saying about early child marriage? I went with 3 other elders, with Archbishop Tutu, who was our chair at the time, and Guru Brundtland, whom Graça mentioned, and Marty Atasari. So 2 male and 2 female elders. We went to the state of Bihar in India. We went to a school where the school is getting girls and boys to be socialized and girls to help each other. So if a girl hears that the parents seem to be talking about marriage, the other girls come round and ask, can she stay 1 more year in school, 2 more years in school? That was one thing. It was really very impressive to see this. And the other thing was, we realized that in the local authority, women were being elected because men were not allowed to serve more than 1 term, I think, and then husbands would put their wives in for the next term. And the wives initially were very docile, but then they gradually realized, you know, we can exercise power here. We can actually decide. And it was noticed that the women were no longer doing what their husband said. They were making up their own minds. Exactly. So it's kind of interesting. I think that critical mass of women being involved in places is very, very important.
Which is why we need more women in the Dáil. But anyway, that's another day's work. Just something I wanted to move on to talk to both of you about, and it was the subject, I think, of the workshop this morning that we were speaking to, the whole question of migration and the present wave of immigrants into Europe, some of it because of what's happening in Syria. But the reaction in some places has been admirable. I mean, it was wonderful to see Angela Merkel say what she did, Angela Merkel say what she did. And I remember thinking, yeah, maybe there is a vision there. And then as people got frightened and politicians got frightened, there was talk of borders going up, and we had awful pictures like that little boy who was washed up on the beach in Greece. But there still is a feeling that Europe is frightened by what's going on. Now, is it time that we all accepted that the world is changing, that climate change itself is probably going to accelerate these big migrant movements, that we really need to think about more than simply sealing our borders, that we have to open our whole minds maybe to a different economic model and to a realization that if we don't share, we'll be forced to share.
You can. In climate change, she is the authority. Mary is excellent, and maybe I would really give it to you first if I feel there is anything I want to add.
Well, first of all, I think this is a fundamental problem for the European community, the European Union. I say that because we need to manage the issue of refugees and migrants. And we need to realize this is not going to be a short-term issue. This is going to be a long-term reality for Europe. And there are many, many ways in which we can do better. We need, first of all, to recognize the humanitarian and the refugee convention, which we've all signed, that refugees must be allowed to escape the persecution and to come to safe countries and to be allowed in. Secondly, we must recognize that migrants have human rights, that nobody should die at sea because they're trying to better themselves. I mean, as Irish people, you know, we had the coffin ships in the famine era ourselves, and we should be very aware of that problem. But it is true that climate change will be a driver, as they say. It will enhance the likelihood of people having to leave their own country because of drought, because of floods, because of rising sea level. And we know that the population in African countries will double by 2050. So we have a big population increase, and it's already there. It may taper off later when women are empowered and are educated, and when there's better health systems, it will even off. But it's there. As the population rises, the capacity, because of climate change, to grow food will diminish. So we have to be aware there will be a problem. We also don't want to encourage a kind of brain drain out of countries because they need their capacity. I think we can take migrants in a circular way and help them to develop skills and assets and then have them go back. You know, I mean, I think we need to be thinking about that kind of circular migration because they should be the leaders of their own country. They should be able to help develop rather than
us stealing their nurses and their doctors.
I mean, there's a tendency to think of an aging Europe, and therefore we need the skills of migrants, and we're looking particularly at Syria because these are very educated, skilled people. I get worried about that because, yes, we do need, but we need to understand the circular nature, and that we also need to encourage that they can go back to their own country. So we, you know, it's just that we need leadership on this issue. And Angela Merkel has given some leadership, but we need much more leadership. And we need to understand that this is a long-term global problem. We've globalized trade, we've globalized capital moving, etc. Labor also is part of that. And we have to understand that we're in a different world. And, you know, we were acknowledging the diversity of who is here. Countries benefit greatly from a diversity, but we mustn't be part of a kind of brain drain from other countries. That's why the Sustainable Development Goals are very important, because they're talking about nobody being left behind, meaning countries. So we have to have a balance of encouraging the development of countries to help them to be more able to adapt to climate change, to build their capacity to adapt as well. It's a kind of whole complex series of decisions, but it's all about managing the issue, not being frightened by it, not stereotyping migrants, not mixing up terrorism and migrants. You know, it's all about being very clear on what we have to manage.
Well, I mean, the related issue, because you've mentioned it just now again, is the whole climate change issue. And Graça, are you very conscious of the fact that the people who will suffer most, certainly immediately, from climate change will be the people in poorer countries? In some cases, people in African countries. In some cases, people like in Bangladesh, where already the sea levels are rising. Do you feel an anger that the developed world, so to speak, isn't taking climate change on board seriously enough?
No, maybe it's a part of growing old. I'm not angry. I think what is happening is that we need to have a conversation of mutual responsibility. You see, African countries, in this case, let me talk of my continent, African countries can also look at this as an opportunity to say, we need to develop, but we don't have to take the same route which some developed countries had to take, where they polluted, they increased pollution. We can be Is it this? Okay. We can be leaders in developing, but using clean energy. African countries are blessed with most of the year we have a sun, and the sun is free. You don't have to buy sun. But of course you need technology to use the sun to transform it into energy. The conversation of mutual responsibility, which I'm talking about, is how African countries and the developed world, which have the technology, can work together and say, let's have development, but clean energy. We use, one, it's the sun. Second, the wind. And third, even in countries where you have, like my country, Mozambique, instead of going the oil route, go the gas route, because the energy from gas is clean. So this is the kind of conversation. And that's why Mary was saying the agreement in Paris is a very important step. But the second one is, what do we do next? And the agreements which countries, the pledges which countries are making, part of it is precisely the transfer of technology. And in transfer of technology, I'll be a little bit long here. We can also, exchange not necessarily in terms of money, but part of the resources which we have. Because we still have natural resources which Europe needs. So the take and give here has to be with that perspective of building our economies in which we think of sustainability, and also we think in technologies which are the best. This is one. The other thing which I would like to mention here also, some of the migrants really, it's not only of climate change, it's of conflict. And this is responsibility of African countries. We need to manage our conflicts. Conflicts will exist in society, but I think African countries have really to be much more focused on societies in which there is no these huge, inequalities which do exist, because they breed conflict, it's one. Sometimes intolerance. Yes, we have to acknowledge it's ethnic, sometimes not much of religious in our part of the world, but particularly ethnic. Yes, it does exist. So I think the responsibility from that side also is that we shouldn't look at migration as something which we cannot prevent. The climate change is something which now it's beyond our control, but we need to develop these technologies I'm talking about. But when it comes to conflict, it's the responsibility of ourselves to fix our conflicts and not to open doors for young people to live because they just cannot survive.
Mary, coming back to the question of a country's individual responsibility for climate change, and indeed each one of us individually, our responsibility for climate change, you've been making the point lately that this isn't just something that's going to happen in the future. It's already happening. It will affect the lives of people who are being born now. And I wondered how you felt about the extent to which various governments, including our own, have sort of said, well, times have been tough, we've had a recession, maybe we can ease back on these targets. Your view?
We're getting into a very short space of time when we have time to ensure that we have a safe world for the children already born when they are older, and for the children to be born. And it's as close as that. The Foreign Minister of France puts it very well when he says, we're the first generation to understand the dangers of climate change and the last generation with time to do something about it. But I'd like to build on what Graça was saying about that conversation between developed and developing countries, because I keep saying this myself in the context of climate justice. We're asking developing countries to develop without emissions. That's really basically what we're saying. It's never been done. We developed with fossil fuel. And then we started to become more green and move towards renewables. we're asking developing countries. They cannot do it without investment and technology. But we're sort of looking at climate finance as a kind of aid or charity. And that's completely wrong. That's the wrong narrative. The narrative we need is we need developing countries to develop as much as possible with renewable energy. Many of them have said in their INDCs that they sent to the UNFCCC, their commitments, they want to go renewable, many of them. And they say, but we need the investment and we need the technology. So it's in the interests of the world that this happens. And I believe that Africa could leapfrog into this technology like it leapfrogged into the mobile phone. There are no landlines for phones in Africa because they went ahead and they use the mobile phone much more than we do to transfer money, to look at markets, to do education, to do health surveillance. I mean, they just have a terrific capacity, and we're learning how to use the mobile phone in the way that, the examples in African countries. I think that there is a real possibility, and this time, as I said, no one must be left behind, which would be wonderful. If we could ensure that the poorest have clean energy, they will take themselves out of the deep poverty, because you become more productive. Many people have said, and I've said it myself, the lack of energy in the Millennium Development Goals was a big mistake. We went for education, we went for health, but we didn't go for energy, and that was a mistake. Now, I think I didn't answer the rest of your question because I thought I might get too close to saying something political.
I think you managed a very political answer, actually, Mary. I think you managed not to say anything that got you into trouble. Graça, one is conscious of the life that you have led in your own right, in your own name, and all that you've done, but also on the way you share the lives of two different men. And I think Nelson Mandela is the one that we in this country would be most familiar with, and one for whom there was enormous respect. My mother used to pray every night for the release of Nelson Mandela.
Wow.
And I remember watching him come out, and it was a year after my mother died, and thinking, she's up there cheering, It was a wonderful, wonderful day. From what you knew of him, and you knew him so very well, were there concerns at the end that his beloved South Africa might not be going the way he wanted? Do you have concerns about South Africa now?
Yes and no. Madiba was very clear that his time as a leader had come to an end at the moment where he established the government of national unity. I mean, the first 5 years of South Africa, it was a government of national unity, which brought all the forces. I mean, the liberation movement, those who were inside the country who never joined the liberation movement, including the old members of the old regime, including some of the militaries who had been, involved in some sort of atrocities. But anyway, reconciliation for him was an extremely serious issue in which he felt he should use his moral authority to say there's no alternative to this if we are not going to have a bloodshed. So from the third year of his presidency, he began to transfer to Thabo Mbeki, who was at the time deputy president, to transfer the issues of government. And I'm sorry. He concentrated on this issue of national building because he knew it was fragile. And while he still had the energy, he wanted to focus on that, while in terms of managing the country, there were much able people and young people who could do. So in that alone,
it expresses that he was aware that nation building in South Africa is still fragile. But at the same time, he needed to trust the new leadership, give them the space to take over and support them while he was still alive. So your question is, was there any concern? And I said yes and no. Yes, he knew that you don't build and consolidate this in a short period of time, but at the same time, he trusted the new leadership and he handed over. Now your question is whether I have some concerns about South Africa today. I'll say again, yes and no. It is true, I mean, that issues, for instance, of racism have come up very strongly. In these last 20 years, we talk much more of racism. Mary gave a lecture 2 years ago?
Yes, about maybe 3 now.
It's maybe 3 years now. And she alerted South Africans about this. It is true that racism is coming up, including that there are some people, young people, particularly those who grew up after freedom, who are saying, but this reconciliation thing, and actually some of them, they speak very openly. They say Mandela is a sellout because he has given away our rights as black people to white people, whatever, whatever. What does it mean? It means that the process of nation building requires not only much more attention, but it is a long-term process, especially in society which was extremely divided as it was. And those divisions do not come together and build a body in a short period of time. You have to be persistent. So I have the concern that maybe we are not paying as much attention to issue of nation building. This is one. We are not paying enough time maybe to social transformation. We have done extremely well in political transition. We have done extremely well, somehow relatively well in economic. At least we had a policy in economic issues, how to empower people who had been marginalized. But we never had very clear strategy of the social transformation. And that's why we have today, I mean, the kind of protests we have. Not only of the students, but also in the townships and the local government. Oh yes, we do. So these are concerns. It's not to say we are going the wrong way. It's to say we have to acknowledge that these are challenges which have to be addressed. We cannot think that they will go away. We need to address them equally as we need to consolidate, I mean, the political dispensation, as we need to consolidate our gains in the economy. We have also to pay the same attention in nation building and social transformation.
Right, they've only given me to 5, so I have to wind up. I just wanted to say to you, Graça, that in an interview you gave, you mentioned how when you and Nelson Mandela were together, you always held hands. And I thought it was a lovely memory. And I just want to say thank you. Thank you to you and Mary Robinson.
Wonderful. Now we have a few parting gifts. This is a custom in this region. Never let people go away without something to remember or smile. And maybe bring you back again. So if we can have Susan, she's probably already fine. She is. Some Foxford products for young Cecily, for Magdalena, Robert, and Mr. Jonas. I will call on Michael Holmes, the chairman of Mayo County Council, to come forward with some of the guides and scouts so we can make these presentations. Thank you. come to the presentation to Mary, Olivia and Graça, and there are beautiful symbols of Ballina status as the salmon capital of Ireland. We have beautiful silver salmon brooches, and we give them to you with a big heart. And we hope too that you'll come back again, and we wish you safe travel to Paris and further afield in a productive time. I think the world's in good hands. Thank you, that's lovely. That's a memory these young people will have for the rest of their lives. And hopefully they find their problems will be solved by then. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Michael home. And now I want to call on Barry McLaughlin, the organising chairman of this local committee, the volunteers who put today's programme together. Barry, come and say.
I've literally been given 60 seconds, and if I could do it faster than that, I will, I promise you. The first person I would like to thank is the Bishop and the priest of the parish for backing us and doing this. So for me, Bishop, it's very close to know that OC, so it's very, very poignant to be here. The second person, the second people I have to thank are the gospel choir. The gospel choir is part of the gospel choir, and they're a great bunch of people, and they're very uplifting in their music, and it's very spiritual. And again, it's very poignant to have you here. Thank you very much. The third set of people I want to thank are the committee. They put me in the chair, but that's only a fault. It was led by A.P. Burke, who just happens to be a brother of Ray Robinson. Jerry Jordan, who is a fellow Lion, and Susan Heffernan, who we nearly drove around the twist, but anyway, she's still with us. The rest of the lads, there's too many to mention, but you know who you are, lads, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart. I've forgotten the words that Graça used to include everybody, but I'd say
Thank you, Barry. Of course, we'd also like to thank the Síochána, the Order of Malta, the Water Club, the Lions Club, as Barry said, the Gospel Choir, the Girl Guides, the Scouts, and Foróige, for all their help today. And as Barry said, there are other people we dare not mention because we're going to leave someone out, but there will be another occasion to thank each and every one of you. Finally, we're going back to the Rejoice Gospel Choir, and after they do a number, Mary and Graça want to go over and actually thank you personally for your wonderful music throughout the afternoon. And all that remains for me to say is, Slán Awaya agus Spanish Giacolir.
Open my eyes, let me see am to worship, here I am to bow down, here I am to say that you're my God. You're altogether lovely, altogether worthy, altogether wonderful to me. Here I am to worship, here I am to bow down, here I am to say that you're my God. You're altogether lovely, altogether worthy, altogether wonderful to me. King of all days, oh so highly exalted, glorious in heaven above. Humbly you came to the earth you created, all full of sake became poor. Here I am to worship, here I am to bow down, here I am to say that you're my God. You're altogether lovely, altogether worthy, altogether wonderful to me. Here I am to worship, here I am to bow down, here I am to say that you're my God. You're altogether lovely, altogether worthy, altogether wonderful to me. Here I am to worship.
Oh, well done.
Thank you.
Hi.
That was really wonderful. That was wonderful. That was great. Thank you so much.